So hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to the Dare Dallas webinar. Recorded this week again, I'm afraid, as unfortunately we're incredibly busy and I'm in some other part of the country, but you join me in the Lincolnshire lockdown lot once more. Tonight we're actually joined from Scotland, which is the second time I think in as many weeks, so we're touching north of the border quite a bit more than we have been doing. And today we're talking about possibly one of the most misunderstood and maybe misaligned articles that we see, and that's furniture. So good evening, Sebastian Pryke, and thank you very much for joining us. So can you tell us, why furniture and how did you get into it?
How did I get into it? Well, it can be a very long story, but basically I did fine art at St Andrews University, where then, back in the 1980s, they taught a furniture history course as well as decorative arts and architectural history. And I'd come from a buildings background and was interested in that, and one thing led to another, which ended up being a PhD in 18th century Scottish furniture. And I found myself being an auctioneer after 5 years of working for Historic Scotland as a furniture specialist, so learned far more in my 10 years of auctioneering, obviously, than one does doing a PhD or a degree.
I think
that was it, really.
Many people could say that about degrees, but potentially not doctorates. But alas, so you were interested in architecture and other kind of sides of things that kind of brought you into the furniture. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the real link was tradespeople and the craftsmen who made buildings, and that naturally led to furniture as well. And it's still, I suppose, my passion is the idea of the people who make the things, rather at a certain level than the objects themselves, but the two are inextricably intertwined.
So if we talk about vernacular furniture, for example, and let's say buildings that furniture goes in, I think what people don't see and what people can't see a lot of the time is when you look at a piece of Victorian or Georgian furniture and you look at a Victorian or a Georgian house, just how they fit into each other. And as soon as you start trying to move these things around, on occasion it just looks a bit odd, don't you find?
Yeah, definitely. And it was the same. I mean, that's the thing, once you start really researching into buildings and their contents, it's the same people making the objects as well as the buildings. So a frame maker might make picture frames and door frames, or a cabinet maker might be making turned furniture and turned balusters for stairwells or built-in clocks, paneling. Certainly most cabinet makers working, especially in the regions rather than the very specialist sort of London trade, would have called themselves joiners or wrights in Scotland, and would have done a whole panoply of work from cabinet making to probably fitting out the interiors of buildings, hanging curtains, putting out cornices, putting beds together, making the beds, mending, painting. It was not really a one-stop shop, but they had all the trades and skills that were needed to do these things, and they specialise at a certain point, but also they're similar skills. And when you go into a Georgian house, the panelling and the cornicing and the chimney pieces and the furniture is all, you can feel that it's sort of come from the same era and the same design ethos and the same skills of the craftsman, and that's part of the joy of it all. And wears the same, and it's the same proportions and the same scale, especially.
No, I think I certainly noticed that, especially when you look at a nice Georgian chest of drawers and you look at the caddy moulding on the top, and then you actually look up into the ceiling and you can see that almost reciprocated throughout the building on different kind of items of furniture and different pieces of architectural interiors. It's absolutely smashing. So why Scottish then, Sebastian? Was it something that kind of drew you particularly to that region, or?
Oh, well, I was at St Andrews, which is and so I mean honestly, I'd done a thesis for my honours degree about an Edinburgh cabinet maker, and in the process of that, I realised there was all this undiscovered information basically to be looked at and researched. So that it wasn't so much when I did postgrad that I wanted to be a postgraduate. It was, I realised there was this research to be done, and it was a great opening and opportunity, really. And Scotland is a hard place to leave once you've been here for a while as well. You probably
Sorry, say that again, Sebastian.
So sorry, it's a hard country to leave once you've lived here for a while.
I can imagine. I haven't been back in a long while, but it's yes, it's a gorgeous place. Now, if we talk about kind of generally speaking as British furniture and not as Scottish furniture, woods obviously play a vital part in that. And I think one of the questions I was going to ask you is, do the type of wood that craftsmen were using actually define the periods that they were working in? So, for example, 16th and 17th century, obviously a lot of oak and the start of using other timbers. And then when we get to kind of, the Georgian kind of period, again, mahogany started to be used a lot more, and probably some other woods we can talk about as well.
Yeah, and I mean, famously, early historians of furniture and interiors talk about the age of oak and the age of walnut and the age of mahogany. Less so the age of rosewood, but you might call the Victorian and 19th century the age of rosewood and more exotic oaks or more exotic woods. But so I mean, and what's interesting is in terms of styles, when you get revivals of styles in the 19th century and 20th century, they also revive the use of those timbers as well. So oak becomes more popular at the end of the 19th century with Victorians, and in the Edwardian era, where they revive Georgian and 18th century styles, they go back to using mahogany. And there is and obviously what it relates to is what they had access to. So walnut tends to come from France and was imported at the end of the 17th century in large quantities. And you can actually trace the pattern of import and export really alongside what wars were going on and who was fighting who. And obviously mahogany doesn't really appear until the transatlantic trade. And in Scotland, there's a widely held belief that mahogany appears slightly earlier because of the tobacco trade.
Oh, really? I didn't know that at all. That's fascinating.
Famously in England, Robert Walpole, the Prime Minister, waived the tax on mahogany so he could use it on his house at Horton Hall in Norfolk. Briefly. Anyway, so the story goes. There are no records relating to Horton anymore, but so that it was what was available. And mahogany is a wonderful wood for using for cabinet makers. It's very hard. You can carve it very easily because it's got a very dense sort of structure. And it was readily available, virgin forests of it, effectively for a long time. Now, of course, it's not, and it's restricted. And then in the 19th century, rosewoods, which come from, again, rainforests, really effectively, become popular because they're exotic and they're very beautiful and sort of, a lot of fashion involves being able to identify that something's changing, so people can see it's different. And rosewood is easy to identify because it's very elaborately grained and got very brilliant colours. So people can tell it's rosewood very easily, and that's one of the things about, any sort of antiques is the ability of an average person to recognise changes in styles and materials as well. So whether it's paintings or furniture or silver or anything, it's a key aspect of, I think, fashion is that someone can spot that it's modern, basically.
I think you touched on it briefly a second ago, but I think the key thing with a lot of furniture is what many people don't realise is that the term reproduction, I think, is obviously much maligned as people thinking it's a 20th century thing, but it's not, is it? Because styles were reproduced from, I think it was almost 100-year cycles, wasn't it, virtually?
Yes, and especially picking up with the beginning of the 19th century and antiquarian tastes, and what they were trying to do was copy really what they thought were medieval things, but the 17th century and the 16th century, and so what was modern in the beginning of the 19th century and into the Victorian era was copying old styles, and that's what they like to do. And yeah, everything what goes around comes around. It's very hard ever to be really original, although I think you can argue that in the 18th century the Rococo styles were a very unique, creative sort of explosion of design and manufacturing. And what followed on from that, the neoclassical revival, was by definition a revival of ancient Roman and Greek. So there is a moment in the middle of the 18th century, which I think is possibly why I love it so much, where in cabinet making terms, Thomas Chippendale, a famous name, and he didn't invent the Rococo, but he applied it to furniture and he gave his name to it, which was a clever thing. It wasn't just him, but what he did was manage to tag his name to this style, which has survived ever since, really. And we know it as a Chippendale style.
What is remarkable, I suppose, in those kind of 100 years, prior to Chippendale, was really that. I mean, 100 years before, we were eating off, drop leaf oak tables that were almost, well, virtually, just not particularly exciting, really, to be honest. And then in that period, we switched to something which is the most ornate things that you could possibly imagine, with the price tags to match. I mean, that period, I imagine, for you is why it became so interesting.
Yeah, and people had more money and trades were more advanced. You were getting into mass manufacturing and cities were developing, so there was access to labor. You have these interesting timbers and other materials, and there's an explosion of wealth, obviously, in Britain in the 18th century. And people are wanting to show that off effectively. And the Rococo and mahogany and the furniture and the styles that go with that age are very suitable to showing off effectively. It was a brash, vulgar, painted, gilded moment. Not the faded brown taste that we see now and associate with the middle of the 18th century. And that's partly because a lot of the timbers have literally faded. So if the furniture that Thomas Chippendale made for Robert Adam and his peers was brightly coloured. It was inlaid with coloured timber and was matched his rooms. We all have a feeling or a sense of Adam style, bright colours, pastels, everything else, and the furniture looked like that as well. But it's all faded away to what we now see is sort of shades of brown. But they would have seen something entirely different.
I think it would have been a lot more rich, and I think rich is a word that I use probably too much. But I think when you look at those pieces when they're originally formed, the timbers and things like that were involved with them were just so rich and obviously created an impact. Now, we've spoken kind of just mentioned a couple of names there, but people such as Sheraton, Chippendale, Hepplewhite, all individual makers, but did their style affect kind of everyone else that was manufacturing pieces at that time?
I mean, certainly they influenced other people and they were influenced by other people. So the reason we know those three names is because they published books.
Yeah.
Thomas Chippendale was probably the only one of the three who really manufactured furniture on any significant scale. But even that was sort of word of mouth until relatively recent scholarship in the 20th century. People didn't know about Chippendale bills. And I mean, everyone thought they had Chippendale furniture because it looked like Chippendale furniture, but people didn't know really whether it was made by him or not. But he published a book, The Directory of Cabinet Makers Assistant. And Thomas Sheraton published a book and Hepplewhite published a book. And that's why their names are famous, and we associate those names with particular styles. So Chippendale was one of half a dozen fantastic makers in London at the time, but he was the only one. And several of them did do designs that were published in pamphlets or individual sheets, but he was the one who published the big book, and he was very good at. He had a partner. They were very clever about marketing it, and they had subscribers and patrons at the highest level of society, and consequently subsequent generations effectively associated his name with that style, and it spread right around the world, and it's still a byword really for a particular style to an extraordinary extent.
When we say published a book, I mean, what I think possibly ladies and gentlemen that are watching today, might not realise is it was purely a marketing tool, wasn't it? Would you describe it almost like a catalogue of what they can produce in order that people would actually be able to look through these things and go, that would look great in my drawing room?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, Chippendale's book was published the first time in 1754, when he was almost unknown, and he was using it as a tool to start his career. That was right at the beginning of his career. We know virtually nothing that he made prior to that date. And what's really fascinating is the style which he gave his name to, this Rococo, I think English furniture style. There's not that much furniture associated with it that he made. So there's the great collection is at Dumfries House, which he did in 1759, 5 years later.
Gosh, it was only 5 years after he published that first book.
So it's still being published, and the second and third editions were 59 and 62. And most of what he's known to have made was actually in a neoclassical style, an Adam style, you might call it, not in the Chippendale style. So there's that wonderful thing that it's right at the beginning of his career. It's his calling card. So he had hundreds of subscribers, which was how he funded it. But most of what he made is not in the Chippendale style at all, really. But yeah, so absolutely, it's a marketing tool, and that's why he did it, and it was very successful. And he says within the book, I've made this for Lord so and so, and I've made one of these for such and such a person, just to prove that it can be done. But the success of it was extraordinary, really, in terms of.
Well, I suppose it's, as you say quite rightly, why we know that name so well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, now I'm going to bring up some images that you very kindly sent to me in order that we can have a little chat about some of these nice items. So let's have a quick chat. Let me just bring up one of these photos first of all. Let's have a chat about chairs.
There you go. So straight into Chippendale style. I mean, this is a perfect example of a mid-18th century, probably made in the 1750s, dining chair, armchair with that florid Rococo scrolling foliate carving and lovely mahogany timbers, solid seats, a needlework seat from the same date. Everything about it is completely emblematic of its age and era. And the thing about the reason I sent you this chair is it's obviously in absolutely pristine original condition, and has been treasured as such for, I think, certainly generations. It's currently for sale in the London trade for a very large amount of money, £30,000 to £40,000. And the reason for that is not that it's by Thomas Chippendale, although it's very much in his manner, but that it's survived in such perfect condition.
I mean, the richness, as I was talking about earlier, just the colour of the timber is phenomenal, isn't it?
And you can see the literally centuries of polishing and waxing and dusting and loving it and fading down into dark. And so it's a glorious thing. And that's one of the, I mean, obviously we're here to talk a bit about the valuations of furniture. And that's one of the things that can add enormously to the value of a piece is the quality of the timbers, the quality of the materials, and the condition that they're in. And what we prize, most people prize, is some aspect of originality, and especially what might be to be an original finish, because it's so rare. The chances of this chair is over 250 years old. The chances of it surviving unbroken, undamaged, unrefinished, uncleaned are just so slim that that's where it gets its value from. And it's a very thing.
I mean, if you look at the ribbon work on the splat, I mean, it's phenomenal that really has survived that amount of time. Yeah,
and they're chairs are they're robust things, but they get used a lot all the time. I'm sitting on a 19th century chair now, and they, like cars, they need mending and fixing and maintaining and looking after and servicing and everything else, depending on the amount of use they get. But this is a really old thing. But what's amazing is it's still completely fit for purpose and yeah, hopefully we'll be sitting at someone's desk and they'll be probably doing a Zoom call on it themselves.
I think I might be slightly worried about sitting on a 40 grand chair, to be perfectly honest, but I'm sure many people wouldn't. Now,
everything's relative, I think, is the thing with antiques.
Now, I'm assuming this would have been part of a set.
You would imagine it would be probably two what they call carvers, so armchairs at the end of a dining table with a long run of slightly narrower dining, just single side chairs without the arms, almost certainly. Although, yeah, you do see in accounts bills for single chairs, but it's hard to know exactly what they might have looked like. But almost certainly part of a dining table set, yeah.
And what I do love about chairs from this period really is the fact that they were designed and obviously manufactured for a gentleman with an ample tummy, shall we say. That's the great thing about this kind of period, to my mind. So absolutely gorgeous thing. Right, let's just have a look at the next image that you very kindly sent to us. Which is a slightly more interesting tripod table than one would think.
So, yeah, and so this is a what you might call an urn table. So that it would have had an urn, a kettle on top of it with hot water, and then you'd have put your teapot on the little sliding tray, which pops out from underneath. And I've gave you this because it's a sweet little thing. You've got the same qualities that the chair had: lovely, solid, dark, rich mahogany timber. It's a similar sort of date and good colour. What's interesting about this, talk about valuations, is it was sold in 1983 for something like £1,500.
Mm-hmm.
And that was at a shop, so someone bought it and they still had the receipt. So that's £1,500 in 1983. And if you were to go to a shop and buy it today, a good quality antique shop, you'd probably pay about the same, or maybe less. It was sold at auction recently, which is why I'm aware of it. £400, £450. So, and that's if you think about whoever was selling it was getting less than that, because obviously the auctioneer would take their commission as well, which is all well and good. So that table, from a valuation point of view, although it's a fine thing, in most respects, you can see what's interesting. Actually, if you look at the leg on the left, you can see a break, and that's the sort of thing that probably wouldn't have been visible when it was bought in the 80s, because what happens when you repair something is you colour it in to match the timber as it is at the time, and then
and over time it wears.
It fades differently to the original colour of the timber. So I bet that was invisible, and that it's hard to know how old that repair might be, but it would have been an old repair in the 80s, I suspect. But what's happened is the colouring has faded differently, so now you can see it, which sort of reduces the value slightly. But what you need to think about is there's a parity of value there from 1983 to now.
Would you say with something
mainly
like
into
well,
concerns about brown furniture nowadays?
I was going to ask, with something like this, I mean, it's to you and I, we find it interesting because it had a purpose. But to the average person, and when we go back to the 80s or the 90s, people are buying these things obviously because they were fantastically well made and had an interesting story. But do you think, comparing it to the chair that we saw before, this is just a little bit plain?
It is plain, but I mean, I saw it in the flesh. It's completely charming. And
yeah.
That's what people love about Georgian furniture, really, is the colour and the finish, and you can touch it and it feels beautiful. And it's not a big showy offy piece, but it's a very practical piece. And it's a hideous cliche, but you could literally put it into anyone's house and it would be useful.
So not just a table, a lamp table, anything, couldn't you? phenomenal. Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally get that. Yeah.
And so, and that's, again, one of the key things with furniture is how functional is it? And when you're buying pictures, you're not thinking about the function. You're probably not even really thinking about the size unless you're furnishing a room. You're buying it because you like it. Furniture is invariably practical. It's almost invariably the first aspect of why you might want it is because it's having to serve a purpose.
Definitely.
The
Excellent.
thing.
Lovely item, and it's just interesting, isn't it? I do like that one. Right, we'll move on to our next photograph that you very kindly sent. Ah, of course.
I tell you what that was.
Let's talk about victory.
Indeed. So what? There are lots of different aspects to a piece of furniture, and there are lots of different reasons that it can be valuable. And what I was trying to do was give you some examples of different types. And obviously, the first chair is something which is valuable just in itself. There's no associated historical value, no maker, no designer, just a perfect, lovely thing. Now, this chair, you won't be surprised, was made from oak, stripped out of the Victory when it came back to be refitted after the Battle of Trafalgar. Now, you could build houses out of oak stripped out of the Victory because it was in service for a very long time. But this piece has real history because it was presented to the Earl of Chatham, who was Pitt's brother and the First Lord of the Admiralty at the time, and descended in his family until it was sold in it would have been the early 90s. So we know when it was made, and that ties in exactly with work on the Victory. Clearly it's commemorating Trafalgar and the victory there, and so we don't know who made it, we don't know who designed it. You can make various guesses, but very hard to be specific. But we know what it was made from, oak from HMS Victory. And there's a whole of furniture made out of interesting bits of timber, but also who it was made for, and that complete provenance, which is extraordinarily valuable. So in this case, it's the history of the piece and the provenance of ownership and who it was made for, which is interesting, rather than necessarily. I mean, the design is fascinating and wonderful, but it's not a designer or a maker.
There's a lot going on in there, isn't there?
It's an amazing thing. I mean, there are lots of chairs with similar traits to this one, especially with the cannons on the arms, and you can't really see it, but it's the rudder of the Victory on the back and everything.
Of course, yes, yeah.
Patterns, and it goes on and on and on. And this is sort of commemorative furniture. This is almost, I would say, just about the best piece that there is. So there's a similar whole seam of furniture made out of the Waterloo oak. It was the oak that Wellington sat under on his horse to conduct the Battle of Waterloo. I was lucky enough to sell a piece from that, as well as this, in my career as an auctioneer.
It is remarkable, though, that you do see a lot of things that come up which are made from a ship, or they're made from something here, or they're made from something there. It's I think I've in my time seen about 3 or 4 tobacco jars that have been made from it, and various bits and bobs that have actually been constructed from wood, various pieces.
There's lots from the Victory. There's a lot from the Bellerophon, which is the ship that Napoleon signed his first surrender on as well. And again, it's tied to the history of the ships. So these ones, if they went in and were refitted, that was a major amount of work, especially after a battle. There'd have been loads of the stuff kicking around. And obviously the famous ships, so Victory, well, it's technically still in service. So, that's like a chair. Ships especially, they get maintained and refurbished, and bits are replaced constantly. So there's a lot of spare timber kicking around.
Brilliant.
But this is good. I love that. One of my best things I've ever sold.
It's a charmer, isn't it? No, it's certainly interesting. let's have a look at So the last image we're going to talk about is this here. So why have we brought this into the fold then?
Well, just to bring everyone down to earth again, really, and it harks back to what I was saying about furniture being primarily practical. And when people talk about the number of houses I go into as a valuer and an insurance surveyor, which I do as well, and everyone says, oh, of course, brown furniture is worth nothing, country house furniture is worth nothing nowadays, and all of this is valueless. And it's sort of an easy thing to say, but it's not true. However, aspects of it are that there is a pertinence to that, and one of the key things is that furniture which isn't practical anymore is really hard to sell. So and there are various categories which have suffered very badly, one of which is bureaus, because they've got this sloping full front which you can't put things on, and there is a ledge at the top there that you can put a few bits on, but there's a sense that it's not a practical piece, and that's not entirely true, is the strange thing about that. But
I like a bureau, to be perfectly honest. You can get a laptop in there, you can put files in the drawer.
Well, really nowadays, yeah, and the antiques trade keeps trying to persuade people that they're perfect for laptops.
They are, I think so anyway, but
there's a strange prejudice against them, and it applies to tables with fold over tops. There's a sense that you're not using them properly, because if you've got a folding table and you put something on top of it, then you're never going to open it up. And even if flaps go down the side, so tables or something like that, it's the same thing. People seem to be prejudiced against the idea of tables like that. And you can pick them up. You really can pick them up for nothing. You can buy bureaus at auction, terrifyingly cheaply. They're quite heavy. They're quite bulky. They don't go in cars, and they have plummeted in value realistically.
But look at what you can get for your money, though. Something like that, absolutely stunning piece.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, look at the work on the feet. I mean, it's just, just from the bottom up, it's gorgeous. It's an
amazing thing, and if the antiques trade is desperate to persuade people to go back and buy old furniture, and because it is incredibly cheap, potentially. You have to qualify that, and the annoying thing is if you see something that you want, everyone else wants it as well.
It's always the way. But I think coming back to the value side of things, I think in the last 30 years, I mean, it's impossible to kind of not notice, I would say, that those values have changed. And there are still items out there, though, aren't there, that are still worth decent amounts of money. Obviously, with the first photo we saw with that chair. And I think a lot of people are tarring all brown furniture with the same brush and thinking it's brown furniture, it's not worth anything, when actually there are still incredibly good quality items out there that people just aren't seeing. I think that's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, and the challenge is, as a valuer, is being able to identify the things that are worth 20,000 or 2,000 or 200 or £2. A chair is a chair is a chair. I mean, to an extraordinary degree. I bought 2 Georgian chairs at an auction recently for 50p, which wasn't a mistake, and isn't representative of their value, but they were still 250 years old, and they're still working absolutely fine. But and it's another Georgian chair that's 250 years old might be 10 or 20,000 pounds. And I think the real thing is knowing what's, and it is almost worthless, which is a small amount of things really. But good things are always good things, and people will always want them. Now, undoubtedly, take that little tripod table. That was a poor investment. To have no appreciation in 35 years is terrifying, really. But someone's had 35 years of use out of it and
I was
pleasure.
about to say, if you've had use out of it, would you have got
Yeah.
that from something from MFI in the early 90s? I doubt it very much. So
No, and it wouldn't have any value now at all. If you'd gone and bought a new piece of furniture in 1983, it would be worthless completely. So there is it's not that, they're not, furniture isn't an investment. Antiques aren't an investment, and if they were, we'd all be doing it, and it's really not that easy. They're things that you buy to use and love, and you should. People, when I was auctioneering, people say, "What should I pay for this?" And I always said, "Well, at what point are you going to be disappointed if you don't get it, or rather, are you not going to be disappointed if someone else buys it because it's beyond what you wanted to pay?" And, if you don't bid enough and you're disappointed, then you should have kept going because you wanted the thing. It's not about what it's worth, about what it's worth to you. That table is worth £300 to whoever sold it, £500 to someone who bought it in the auction, and £1,500 if you go and buy it in a shop. And none of those figures are wrong, which is one of the other challenges as a valuer, is which of those figures do we use for any one item? And if the object has a unique provenance, so that Victory chair, then you can't go and get another one. So how much value you ascribe to that thing?
It's almost a piece of art in its own right, really, isn't it? It's a piece of art because you can't replicate it. But it's a fascinating subject. I've always enjoyed furniture, especially from the period we've kind of focused on it. Now, we're almost out of time on this, so I do thank you again for your time today, Sebastian. But if there was one piece that either you've sold as an auctioneer, or you've seen, or you've handled, that you would love to have owned, what is it?
Oh, and that's one of those questions that changes from day to day. The thing, or something that I was looking at recently was, and it's a piece that I researched for the dealer who had it, and it was a cabinet, large cabinet like a bookcase, but with solid doors, and the top half had pietra, so inlaid marble panels that had been bought by the owner on the Grand Tour in Rome in the middle of the 18th century, and the man who had bought that set of panels was on his Grand Tour with Robert Adam as both, and I think probably Robert Adam sketched a design, said, "Oh, you need to get this made up into a cabinet," and Charles Hope went home and had it made into a cabinet, and then about 10 or 20 years later, when Adam was famous, Adam designed a room around this cabinet. And the design for the room shows all the walls, obviously, and there's a space where the cabinet goes.
It's almost a pivotal piece for furniture, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's a little sort of intaglio in the pediment showing the owner that I think he had done in. So, for me, all that history is a beautiful thing, but I love knowing all those things, knowing who commissioned something, who designed it, who made it, where it's been, the provenance of thing. I go around exhibitions and I read the labels and I want to know who owned them. Right. And definitely, it's kind of follow the money, is the old cliche the economists talk about, and that all is what makes it fabulous for me. It was fun researching it and finding out about that because no one knew about it really. So there's sort of link, but was a really exciting thing that ended up at Grosvenor House and is in a very lavish private collection now with a hi-fi.
That's the question. What was it worth?
Well, I mean, that's one of the things no one really knows, but I suspect somewhere way north of £500,000.
My word, gosh! And we're talking about furniture values going down.
Yeah.
But I suppose you're buying into history as much as you are a piece of work, aren't you?
Yeah, but weirdly, you're buying a useful thing,
Yeah.
So, and that's the thing to build a room around, which I think probably literally happened. And loads of it's an icebreaker, lots of conversation. There's a story. I mean, there's lots more than I told you, and that's why people like owning things. You're only owning it for a time, and then someone else will own it.
Exactly. Just Gorgeous, gorgeous. Thanks. Sebastian, I'm afraid we're out of time. So I must say thank you ever so much for joining me
Pleasure.
today. And I must say thank you ever so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us again. We'll be with you next week with another one of our specialists talking about another subject. And yet again, I do have to say thank you ever so much for everyone that gets in touch each week to say how much they're enjoying these webinars and how much they're learning from them. Again, today I've learned a fantastic amount from Sebastian, and we hope you have too. So again, Dr. Sebastian Pryke, and I'm Alastair Meiklejon. Good evening. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.